We've all been there. The meal is over, waiter brings you the check, and suddenly you aren't paying for dinner, you're doing a math problem. You're wondering, was that service worth 20%? If I leave 15, do I look like a cheapskate? If I leave 0, am I a monster? Americans have a love-hate relationship with tipping. We treat it like a mandatory bonus for good service. But what if I told you that empty line at the bottom of your receipt wasn't designed to be a reward for good service? It was designed to save the post-Civil War South from having to pay black folks a living wage. Tips began as a weapon to maintain the economics of slavery in a free country. But the story that I'm going to tell you isn't about the weapon. It's about the men who grabbed that weapon by the blade and used it to cut themselves a slice of the American pie. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to well before the Civil War and go to Tudor England. Back then, if you were a guest in a lord's house, you were expected to pay the servants for their trouble. It was called the Vales. By the 17th century, the practice had moved into coffee houses. Legend has it that there was a bowl on the counter labeled "To Ensure Promptitude," TIP. Now, historians argue about whether or not that acronym is even true, but the function is undeniable. It wasn't gratitude, it was a bribe. It was a way for a rich man to buy better treatment from the guy working the counter next to him. Fast forward to the 1860s, and wealthy Americans travel to Europe, and they see this tipping habit. They see how it makes servants bow lower and move faster, and they love it. They bring it back to the United States to show off their European sophistication. But here's the thing, Americans hated it. By the late 1800s, tipping was viewed as un-American. Why? Because America was supposed to be a democracy, a land of equals. The idea that one man had to buy favor from another man or a worker had to beg for his wages was disgusting. Now remember, if you're black, this is not for you. This is white people they're talking about. The backlash was so strong that by 1915, 6 states had banned tipping. In 1918, Georgia declared tips a commercial bribe. So if the government tried to ban it and the people hated it, why are we still tipping? It survived because of racism, because the South needed a loophole. After the Civil War, the American economy was in a crisis. The 13th Amendment ended slavery, and suddenly you couldn't force black people to work for free anymore. You had to pay them. But industries that relied on service labor, restaurants, hotels, railroads, weren't ready to give up their free labor. Enter George Pullman. He invented the Pullman sleeping car, which was basically a luxury hotel on wheels. He needed thousands of servants to wait on his wealthy white passengers, and he knew exactly where he could find them. He hired formerly enslaved black men. He knew that they were desperate for work, and he knew that they were trained in servants of white folks. But Pullman didn't want to pay them a living wage. He created a system that would change the restaurant industry. He paid the porters a base wage of just $27.50 a month. Even in 1916, that was poverty wages. You couldn't pay your rent, let alone feed a family. The hours, these men worked up to 400 hours a month. That is double a full-time job today. They were on call 24 hours a day and had to sleep in the smoking cars. They had to pay for their own uniforms and even had to pay for the shoe polish they used on passenger shoes. So, once again, how did they survive? Pullman told the public, "We provide the luxury and you provide the wages." He explicitly told customers that the porter's livelihood depended on tips. This wasn't generosity, it was a business model. It allowed the Pullman company to offload their labor costs onto the customer, while keeping their black labor force in a constant state of groveling dependency. This was the trap, a system designed to make black men beg for their dinner. But this is where the story pivots. Because the Porters, they weren't victims, they were geniuses. The Porters realized very quickly that they were playing a psychological game. They knew that these white passengers missed the Old South. They missed feeling like they were superior, like the masters. So the Porters sold them that feeling. They mastered the performance. They learned that if they anticipated the needs before they were being asked, if they smiled at an insult, if they made the passenger feel like he was a king, they would crack their wallets wide open. They were charging a tax on the ego, and it worked. Skilled porters could make 3 to 4 times their salary in tips. It was a time when black men were shut out of almost every other industry. Porters became some of the wealthiest black men in the community. They didn't spend that money frivolously. That tip money built the black middle class in Chicago, Harlem, and D.C. They sent their children to Howard and Morehouse. They took the scraps they were being given from their former master's table and built their own table. There was a cost, though. This performance was exhausting. Smiling when you wanted to scream takes a toll on your soul. And practically, it was dangerous. If a passenger had a bad day, you didn't eat. If you got sick, there was no safety net. Porters knew that this type of hustling system wasn't enough, so they had to break it. In 1925, they reached out to a labor organizer named A. Philip Randolph, and they declared war on the Pullman Company. And this was a very dangerous game. Pullman hired spies to infiltrate their meetings. If you got caught with a union card, you'd get fired. They were threatened and beaten, but for 12 years, they continued to organize. And in 1937, they did the impossible. Pullman Company surrendered. They signed the first major labor deal between a black union and a major U.S. corporation. They forced Pullman to increase wages, limit hours, but more importantly, they reduced the reliance on tips. They demanded dignity in the form of a paycheck. Today, this battle isn't over. The tipping system that George Pullman popularized is still the standard in the United States. In many states, the federal minimum wage for tip workers is just $2.13. That logic hasn't changed. Your boss provides the job and your customers provide the wage. But the next time you look at that receipt and you feel annoyance, you feel anger at the 20% that you feel like you're being forced to pay, remember those porters. Remember that for 50 years, that tip line was the only thing standing between a black family and starvation. And remember that they took the loose change and funded the civil rights movement. This is literally Black history sitting in your wallet. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic Black History. And this has been a history of tipping, kind of history of tipping. This is a revised history of tipping and how we reacted to tipping as opposed to the history of tipping itself. I hope you like this sort of thing. I want to bring more of how black people fought against the machine to change how people view Black history, and less of a history lesson, more of how we overcome, how we won, how we fought. To think outside, view Black history in a different way, in a different light, or reframe it. Anyway, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad you stayed to the end. I'd like to thank all my financial contributors, all my day ones. I love you all. Thank y'all for coming out. Peace.